The blood-soaked wanted poster fluttered in the wind as Nathaniel Everett stumbled into the small town of Truckee, Nevada Territory, in the autumn of 1868. With her hair chopped short and bound tightly beneath a worn slouch hat, she prayed the disguise would hold just long enough to find sanctuary from the men who had murdered her family and framed her for the crime. The Sierra Nevada mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Nathaniel Natty to the few who'd ever cared for her kept her head down as she passed the town's ramshackle buildings. Her boots kicked up dust from the main street as she headed toward the only establishment showing signs of life at this early hour, the Timber Wolf Saloon. The sound of a piano being badly played spilled out into the street alongside raucous laughter. Natty paused, gathering her courage. She needed money and a place to hide, and saloons often needed help with cooking or cleaning. With her disguise, she might just pass as a young man looking for work. She pushed through the batwing doors, keeping her shoulders squared and her stride deliberately longer than felt natural. The smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies assaulted her senses as she made her way to the bar. "What'll it be, boy?" the bartender asked, his bushy eyebrows raised. "Looking for work," Natty replied, pitching her voice low. "Can do most anything clean, haul, whatever needs doing." The bartender scrutinized her face. Natty fought the urge to fidget under his gaze. At 20 years old, she lacked the stubble that would have made her disguise more convincing. "Might have something," he said finally. "Owner's in the back office, name's Jacob Xander. Go see if he's hiring." Natty nodded her thanks and made her way through the crowded room, ignoring the curious glances thrown her way. She rapped her knuckles against the door marked private at the back of the saloon. "Enter," called a deep voice from within. She pushed the door open to find a tall man with broad shoulders bent over a ledger, his face partially obscured by a shock of dark hair that fell across his forehead. When he looked up, Natty was struck by eyes the color of a summer storm. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, remembering to keep her voice low. The man, Jacob Xander, she presumed studied her with a slight frown. "Don't recall saying that, boy. The bartender said you might have work." Jacob set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair, giving her a thorough assessment. "How old are you, kid?" 18, she lied. "Strong enough for any job you've got." A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "That's so. Name?" Nathan, she stumbled slightly. "Nathan Everett." "Well, Nathan Everett, I could use someone to help with deliveries and stock." "Early mornings, late nights. Think you can handle that?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes, sir. When do I start?" "Right now." He stood, revealing his full height. He was easily 6 feet tall, with the lean, muscular build of a man who knew hard work. "First delivery's a sack of grain to the livery stable. Then you'll help unload the supply wagon coming in from Carson City." Natty nodded, determined to prove herself useful. "I can do that. Room and board comes with the job," Jacob continued. "There's a small cabin out back where my last helper stayed. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." It was more than she'd dared hope for, not just employment but shelter too, away from prying eyes. "That would be mighty appreciated." Jacob gestured to a large sack propped against the wall. "Start with that. Livery's down at the end of the street. Sam Henderson runs it. Tell him it's from me." Natty hoisted the sack, surprised by its weight. She staggered momentarily but found her footing, determined not to show weakness. Jacob watched her with that same assessing look. "You sure you can manage that?" "Yes, sir," she grunted, already heading for the door. "I'll show you the cabin when you get back," he called after her. Natty made her way down the street, the heavy sack burning her shoulders. She'd grown up on a small ranch outside Sacramento, so hard work wasn't foreign to her. But months on the run had weakened her more than she cared to admit. The livery stable smelled of hay and horses, a comforting scent that reminded her of home. A grizzled man with kind eyes approached as she entered. "You must be Jake's new helper," he said, taking the sack from her with ease. "Sam Henderson, you are?" "Nathan Everett," she replied, flexing her sore shoulders. Sam nodded, setting the grain down. Jake's got a good eye for honest folk. You running from something, son? The question sent a chill down Natty's spine. Why would you ask that? Sam shrugged. Most folks who end up in Truckee are running from something or someone. No judgment here. Towns full of people starting over. Before Natty could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the open stable doors, she saw 3 riders coming into town, dust billowing behind them. Even from this distance, she recognized the lead rider's silhouette. Randall Porter, one of the men who'd murdered her parents and framed her for the crime. I need to go, she said urgently, backing toward the rear door. Sam frowned at her sudden change in demeanor. Everything all right? Fine, she lied. Just remembered Mr. Xander's expecting me back to help with a delivery. She slipped out the back of the stable and made her way through the alley, heart hammering in her chest. This was bad. Porter and his men had tracked her farther than she'd thought possible. She needed to leave town immediately. Natty circled back toward the saloon, keeping to the shadows. She could grab her few possessions from where she'd hidden them and be gone before nightfall. The job and shelter had been a brief, tantalizing taste of stability, but she couldn't risk staying. As she approached the rear of the saloon, she spotted Jacob unloading supplies from a wagon. She hesitated, torn between fleeing immediately and the courtesy of explaining her departure. Before she could decide, a voice called out from the street. Checking every establishment in town. We're looking for a murderer. Natty pressed herself against the wall of the saloon, heart racing. She peered around the corner to see Porter and his companion speaking to the sheriff outside his office. Female, about 20 years old, Porter was saying, killed her own folks in cold blood. Goes by Nathaniel Everett, though she might be using another name by now. The sheriff nodded grimly. I'll keep an eye out. What's she look like? Tall for a woman. Brown hair, usually wears it long but might have cut it. Green eyes. Distinctive birthmark on her right hand, looks like a half moon. Natty glanced down at her hand where the telltale birthmark was currently covered by a dirty bandage. She had to leave now. She turned to flee and collided with a solid chest. Jacob steadied her with a firm grip on her shoulders. Whoa there, Nathan, where's the fire? Natty couldn't meet his eyes. I have to go. Jacob frowned, his gaze shifting to the street where Porter and his men were dispersing, likely to begin their search of the town. Those men looking for you? He asked quietly. She tensed, ready to bolt, but his hands remained gentle on her shoulders. Let me go, please. Instead of releasing her, Jacob drew her further into the shadows. My office. Now, Natty allowed herself to be guided back into the saloon and through to Jacob's private office. Once the door closed behind them, she moved to put the desk between them. I didn't kill anyone, she blurted out. They're lying. Jacob leaned against the door, arms crossed over his chest. I figured as much, his calm response through her. You, what? Those men out there. I recognize the type, not lawmen hired guns, and they're not looking for justice. Natty stared at him, uncertain whether to trust his apparent insight. How would you know? A rueful smile crossed his face. Let's just say I wasn't always a saloon owner. Now you want to tell me what's really going on, Nathaniel, if that's even your name. She hesitated, weighing her options. Jacob hadn't called out to Porter and his men, which suggested he might be willing to help. But trusting anyone was a risk she hadn't taken in months. My name is Nathaniel Everett, she said finally, but most people call me Natty. She removed her hat, allowing her short-cropped hair to fall free. Those men murdered my parents 7 months ago. They're claiming I did it. Jacob's expression remained neutral, though his eyes widened slightly. Why would they frame you? My father discovered something documents proving that Porter and his employer were swindling settlers out of their land. They killed him and my mother to get the papers back. And you have these documents? Natty shook her head. No. They were looking for them when I returned home and found. Her voice broke. Found my parents, I ran. They've been hunting me ever since. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You've been on the run for 7 months, alone. Yes. He pushed away from the door and moved to a cabinet in the corner of the room. After unlocking it, he withdrew a bottle and 2 glasses. "Drink," he said, pouring a finger of whiskey and sliding it across the desk to her. Natty took it gratefully, the liquor burning a trail down her throat but steadying her nerves. "Here's what we're going to do," Jacob said, sipping his own drink. "You'll stay in that cabin out back. It's secluded enough that no one will notice you there. I'll tell anyone who asks that Nathan Everett came and went decided the job wasn't for him." Hope mingled with suspicion in Natty's chest. "Why would you help me?" Jacob's eyes darkened. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be hunted for something you didn't do." Before she could press him further, shouting erupted from the saloon's main room. Jacob moved to the door, cracking it open to peer out. "It's them," he said quietly. "They're questioning everyone." Panic surged through Natty. "I need to go." "No," Jacob said firmly. "That's exactly what they'll expect. Trust me on this." He moved to a worn rug in the corner and pulled it aside, revealing a trapdoor. "Root cellar. Used to be part of a way station for the Pony Express. Get in." Natty hesitated only briefly before climbing down the wooden ladder into the musty darkness below. Jacob handed down a lantern, then paused. "Take off that bandage," he whispered. "They'll be looking for it." She unwrapped the cloth from her hand, exposing the crescent-shaped birthmark. "I'll come back when it's safe," he promised, then closed the trapdoor, plunging her into lantern-lit darkness. Natty settled on a crate, listening to the muffled sounds above. She could make out heavy footsteps and raised voices, but not the words being exchanged. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she waited, jumping at every creak of the floorboards above. Finally, the trapdoor opened and Jacob's face appeared. "They've moved on to search the boarding house, but they'll be back. We need to move quickly." He helped her up into the office. "I've told them you Nathan came and went this morning. Decided the job wasn't for you. They seem to buy it, but they'll be watching the roads out of town." "Then I'm trapped," Natty said, despair creeping into her voice. "Not necessarily." Jacob moved to his desk and pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Put these on. You'll be staying in the cabin as promised, but not as Nathan Everett." Natty unwrapped the package to find a simple dress and women's undergarments. She looked up at him in confusion. "Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight," he explained. "You'll be Nora Evans, my cousin from back east, come to help with the bookkeeping." The plan was audacious, but it made a certain kind of sense. Porter and his men were looking for Nathaniel Everett, disguised as a boy. A woman working openly at the saloon wouldn't draw their attention. "Will it work?" she asked. "It might if we're convincing enough." Jacob turned his back to give her privacy. "Change quickly. I'll need to introduce you to my staff before those men return." Natty changed into the dress, grateful that it fit reasonably well. She had spent so long disguised as a boy that the fabric against her skin felt strange and foreign. "I'm decent," she said when she had finished. Jacob turned and studied her with an unreadable expression. "You clean up nice, Miss Evans." Natty smoothed the fabric of the dress. "Nora Evans," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "I don't know the first thing about bookkeeping. You can read and write, of course. Then I'll teach you the rest." He opened the office door. "Come on. Time to introduce you to your new life." The next few days passed in a blur as Natty Nora settled into her role. The staff at the Timber Wolf accepted Jacob's explanation without question. She divided her time between the office, helping with the books, and serving drinks during busy evenings. The work was exhausting but preferable to constantly looking over her shoulder. Porter and his men remained in town, taking rooms at the boarding house, and making a show of searching for the fugitive Nathaniel Everett. Each time they entered the saloon, Natty's heart raced, but they paid little attention to Jacob's quiet, efficient cousin. One evening, as she was cleaning up after closing, Jacob approached her with 2 cups of coffee. "You're adapting well," he observed, handing her one of the cups. Natty accepted it gratefully. "I've had plenty of practice being someone I'm not." They sat at one of the empty tables, the silence between them comfortable after days of working side by side. "Can I ask you something?" Natty ventured. "Depends on what it is." "You said you understand what it's like to be hunted. What did you mean?" Jacob stared into his coffee. For a moment she thought he might not answer. "I was a Union scout during the war," he said finally. "Got captured by Confederate forces near the end of the fighting. Escaped with some sensitive information. There are still people who'd prefer I didn't live to tell certain tales." "Is that why you're in Truckee?" He nodded. "It's as good a place as any to disappear." Natty studied his profile in the lamplight. There was more to his story, she was certain, but she understood the need for secrets. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me." Jacob's eyes met hers, and something passed between them that made her breath catch. "We outcasts need to stick together," he said with a half-smile. Before she could respond, a knock at the front door broke the moment. Jacob stood, motioning for her to stay seated as he went to answer it. The sheriff stood on the threshold, looking grim. "Evening, Jake, need a word." Jacob admitted him, locking the door again behind him. "What brings you by so late, Sheriff?" The lawman nodded to Natty. "Evening, Miss Evans. Mind if I speak to your cousin alone? Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Nora," Jacob replied evenly. The sheriff sighed. "Those men looking for that Everett character. I've been asking around about them. They're not who they claim to be. Porter's wanted in California for extortion and murder." Natty's hands tightened around her coffee cup, but she kept her expression neutral. "I figured as much," Jacob said. "What are you planning to do about it?" "That's the thing. I sent a telegram to the authorities in Sacramento. Turns out there was a murder matching what they described Rancher and his wife killed, but there's no evidence their daughter did it." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Natty briefly before returning to Jacob. "Funny thing is, the description they gave of this Nathaniel person matches what witnesses said of the daughter. Nathaniel Everett." Natty felt the blood drain from her face. Jacob moved casually to stand beside her, his presence reassuring. "Interesting," he said neutrally. "Why are you telling me this?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "Because Porter and his boys have been watching your place, and because that young man who came looking for work and disappeared so suddenly. Several people mentioned he had a bandaged right hand. Just like Everett's daughter reportedly has a birthmark on her right hand." There was a tense silence as Jacob and the sheriff stared at each other. "What exactly are you implying, Sheriff?" Jacob asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The lawman raised his hands placatingly. "I'm not implying anything, just sharing information between friends." He turned toward the door. "I'm heading to Carson City tomorrow to meet with the territorial marshal. Won't be back for at least 3 days. Thought you should know." After the sheriff left, Natty sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Did he just? She began, "Give us warning." "Yes." Jacob locked the door again. "We need to move quickly. Porter and his men won't wait for the sheriff to return." "What do we do?" Jacob paced, thinking. "We need to get you out of town, but they'll be watching the roads." He stopped suddenly. "There's another way, through the mountains. I know a trail the miners use. It's dangerous this time of year, but possible." "When?" she asked, already mentally preparing. "Tomorrow night." "I'll make arrangements." He fixed her with a serious look. "But first, we need evidence against Porter. Without it, you'll never stop running." Natty shook her head. "The documents my father found are probably long gone." "Maybe, maybe not. Men like Porter are arrogant. They might have kept them as leverage against their employer." Jacob leaned across the table. "Where would they hide something like that?" "Porter has a saddlebag he keeps close. I've seen him with it every time they've come into town." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then that's what we need to get." The following day passed with excruciating slowness. Natty went about her duties as Nora Evans, smiling and serving drinks, all while acutely aware of Porter watching from his usual corner table. As evening approached, Jacob put their plan into motion. "Another round for Mr. Porter and his friends," he instructed Natty, placing 3 glasses of their finest whiskey on her tray. "On the house." She carried the drinks to the table, careful to keep her eyes downcast as she had each time she'd served them before. "From Mr. Xander," she murmured, setting down the glasses. "With his compliments." Porter grunted his thanks, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer than was comfortable. Natty retreated quickly, feeling his gaze on her back. Over the next 2 hours, Jacob ensured Porter and his companions received several more complimentary drinks, stronger each time. By closing, the men were slumped in their chairs, barely coherent. "Gentlemen," Jacob announced, approaching their table. "I hate to interrupt your evening, but we're closing up." Porter squinted up at him. "Already? I'm afraid so, but the night doesn't have to end." Jacob leaned in conspiratorially. "I've got a private poker game starting upstairs if you're interested, exclusive just a few select players." The prospect of gambling perked Porter up. "That's so. What's the buy-in?" "500, Jacob replied smoothly. "Too rich for some, but I figured men like yourselves." "We're in," Porter declared, struggling to his feet. He grabbed his saddlebag from beside his chair, clutching it possessively. "Excellent. Second door on the right, top of the stairs. The others are already waiting." As Porter and his men stumbled up the stairs, Jacob turned to Natty with a nod. The saloon was empty now except for them, and the piano player. Tom, a former pickpocket from San Francisco whom Jacob had taken into his confidence. The three of them moved quickly upstairs to the room adjacent to where Porter believed a poker game was waiting. Through a small spy hole drilled in the wall, they could see Porter and his companions settling in, looking confused as they realized they were the only ones there. "Where's everyone else?" one of them slurred. "Probably running late," Porter muttered, setting his saddlebag beside his chair. Tom slipped silently out of their hiding place and into the hallway. Moments later, they heard a crash from downstairs, followed by Tom's voice calling out in alarm about a fire in the kitchen. Porter and his men lurched to their feet, hands going to their guns as they stumbled toward the door. As they disappeared down the hallway, Jacob and Natty slipped into the now empty room. "Quick," Jacob whispered, grabbing the saddlebag Porter had left behind in his haste. They hurried back to their hiding place, hearts pounding as they heard Porter and the others returning, complaining about the false alarm. Jacob passed the saddlebag to Natty as they listened to Porter's sudden curse. "My bag. Where's my damn bag?" "Probably took it downstairs with you," one of his companions suggested. "I didn't, it was right here." Porter's voice was panicked now. "Search the room, search everywhere." As Porter and his men tore the room apart looking for the missing saddlebag, Natty carefully opened it. Inside, beneath a change of clothes and personal items, she found a leather portfolio. Her hands trembled as she withdrew it and opened the flap. There, neatly folded, were the documents her father had discovered: deeds with forged signatures, letters outlining the scheme to intimidate settlers off their land, and most damning of all, a directive ordering the removal of John and Margaret Everett, signed by someone identified only as W. "That's it," she breathed. "This proves everything." Jacob nodded grimly. "Now we need to get out of here before they realize what's missing." They crept from the hiding place and down the back stairs, the portfolio tucked securely inside Natty's dress. Tom was waiting for them in the kitchen, a small pack of supplies ready. "Horses are saddled out back," he whispered. "Better hurry, those fellows are getting mighty agitated upstairs." As if to emphasize his point, a crash sounded from above, followed by Porter's rage-filled voice. "Someone's taken it. Search the whole damn building." "Go," Jacob urged, pushing Natty toward the back door. "I'll hold them off." "Not without you," she insisted, grabbing his arm. A moment of understanding passed between them before Jacob nodded. Together, then. They slipped out into the night where two horses waited, already saddled. As they mounted, the back door of the saloon burst open, Porter's silhouette framed in the lamplight. "There!" he shouted, raising his pistol. A shot rang out, splintering wood near Natty's head as Jacob spurred his horse forward, leading the way out of town toward the mountains. Behind them, Porter and his men scrambled for their own mounts, their shouts fading as Natty and Jacob galloped into the darkness. They rode hard for an hour before Jacob led them off the main trail and into a dense grove of pines. The night was clear but cold, the first hint of winter sharpening the air. "We'll rest the horses briefly," Jacob said as they dismounted. Then we need to keep moving. That trail I mentioned starts about 3 miles from here. Natty leaned against a tree, catching her breath. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were fugitives now, both of them. You didn't have to come, she said. You could have stayed, claimed I stole the saddlebag. Jacob shook his head. Porter wouldn't have believed that. Besides, I've been looking for a reason to move on. Truckee was getting too comfortable. Natty studied him in the moonlight filtering through the trees. Where will we go? I have a friend in Virginia City. He can help get those documents to the right people. Jacob checked his horse's saddle. After that, wherever you want. The implication that he intended to stay with her sent an unexpected warmth through Natty's chest. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats brought them both to attention. They're following our trail, Jacob said grimly. We need to move. They remounted and set off through the forest, Jacob leading them on a winding path designed to lose their pursuers. The terrain grew steeper as they ascended into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, the horses laboring against the incline. Dawn was breaking when they reached a narrow pass between 2 granite outcroppings. Beyond it, Natty could see the trail dropping away into a valley, then rising toward the higher mountains. Just through here, Jacob said, dismounting to lead his horse through the tight space. Once we're on the other side, we'll be harder to track. Natty followed suit, the portfolio secure against her skin beneath her clothing. As they emerged on the other side of the pass, a shot echoed off the rocks. Jacob grunted, stumbling forward. Jacob, Natty cried, rushing to his side. He pressed a hand to his upper arm, blood seeping between his fingers. I'm all right, just grazed me. More shots rang out as Porter and his men reached the pass behind them. Jacob pushed Natty toward a jumble of boulders for cover. Take this, he said, pressing his revolver into her hand. Keep them pinned down. I'm going to circle around. You're hurt. It's nothing. I'll be fine. He squeezed her shoulder. Trust me. Before she could protest further, he was gone, slipping away among the rocks. Natty positioned herself behind a boulder, the weight of the revolver unfamiliar in her hands. She had fired a gun before her father had taught her for protection on the ranch, but never at a person. Porter's voice called out from the pass. We know you're out there, Everett. Give us back what you stole and maybe we'll let you live. Natty remained silent, tracking movement among the rocks on the other side of the pass. When one of Porter's men darted between covers, she fired, the shot going wide but forcing him back into hiding. You'll run out of bullets before we do, Porter shouted. And then we're coming for you. A single shot rang out from somewhere to her right, Jacob's position. One of Porter's men cried out in pain. Bastard got Lewis, someone yelled. Confusion erupted on the other side of the pass as Porter and his remaining man tried to locate the new threat. Natty used the distraction to move to a different position, circling toward where she'd seen Jacob disappear. She found him crouched behind an outcropping, his face pale but determined. Fresh blood stained his sleeve. It's worse than you said, she whispered, noting how he favored the arm. I've had worse, he replied, but we need to end this quickly. Porter's voice rang out again. Xander, we know it's you helping her. This isn't your fight. He made it my fight when he brought it to my town, Jacob muttered. To Natty, he said, I've got an idea, but it's risky. I'm listening. They've got us pinned from the front, but there's a path leading up and around if one of us can get behind them. Natty nodded. I'll go. Jacob looked surprised. You sure? I'm smaller, quieter, and you're wounded. She handed his revolver back to him. Just keep them distracted. Before he could object, she slipped away, finding the narrow path he'd mentioned. It wound steeply upward, skirting the edge of the pass. The footing was treacherous, loose stones threatening to give away her position with every step. When she reached the top, she could see Porter and his remaining man below, using the rocks at the mouth of the pass for cover as they exchanged fire with Jacob. Neither had noticed her position above them. Natty looked around for a weapon, finding only loose rocks. She picked up the largest she could manage, took careful aim, and dropped it directly onto the head of Porter's companion. The man crumpled without a sound. Porter spun around at the movement, firing blindly upward. Natty ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding. "Show yourself," Porter screamed, panic edging his voice as he realized he was now alone. Natty gathered more rocks, pelting Porter's position from above. As he fired uselessly at the cliffside, Jacob emerged from cover and approached from the other direction, revolver trained on Porter's back. "Drop the gun, Porter," Jacob commanded. Porter froze, then slowly lowered his weapon. "You don't understand what you're involved in, Xander." "The man I work for, William Blackwood," Natty said, climbing down to join them. "We know, we have the documents." Porter's face contorted with rage and fear. "You'll never be safe. Blackwood has connections all over the territory. He'll find you." "Not if we find him first," Jacob replied, keeping his gun steady despite the blood soaking his sleeve. "The law will be very interested in these documents." As Porter lunged forward in desperation, Jacob fired. The shot caught Porter in the chest, dropping him to the ground. He gasped, blood bubbling at his lips as he clutched at the wound. "You don't understand." He wheezed, life already fading from his eyes. "The sack, take them off." "What's he talking about?" Jacob asked, frowning. Natty knelt beside the dying man, her disgust for him tempered by a need to understand. "What sack, Porter? What do you mean?" Porter's bloodied hand fumbled with his jacket, pulling weakly at an inner pocket. "Please, I beg you take them off," she whispered. Jacob approached cautiously, keeping his gun trained on Porter as he reached for the pocket. He withdrew a small leather sack, its contents making a metallic sound as he held it. The cowboy froze when he opened the sack. Inside were military identification tags, Union Army bearing the name of Captain William Blackwood. "These aren't Blackwood's," Jacob said, his voice strangely hollow. "They're mine." Natty looked up in confusion. "What?" "Jacob Xander was a scout, but he wasn't my original name. I was born James Blackwood. William is my father." The revelation hit Natty like a physical blow. "Your father is behind all this," Jacob or James nodded grimly. "I changed my name after the war, wanted nothing to do with him or his business dealings. I knew he was corrupt, but this." He gestured to Porter's body. "I didn't know he'd go this far." Porter gave a final, rattling breath and went still. Natty stood slowly, trying to process this new information. "Did you know?" she asked. "About my parents, about me?" "No," Jacob insisted, meeting her gaze. "I swear it. I haven't spoken to my father in 5 years." She searched his face for deception and found none, only pain and a desperate need for her to believe him. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Jacob looked down at his father's tags, then at the portfolio containing the evidence of his crimes. "Now we do what we planned. We take these documents to the authorities. I'll testify against him if needed. He's your father, and he's a murderer." Jacob tucked the tags into his pocket. "The man who raised me died a long time ago. What's left is just a criminal who shares my blood." They made their way back to their horses, leaving Porter and his men for the scavengers. Jacob was growing weaker from blood loss, the adrenaline of the confrontation wearing off. "We need to tend to that wound," Natty said as she helped him mount. "There's a line shack about 2 hours from here. We can rest there, then continue to Virginia City tomorrow." The journey to the line shack was slow, Jacob increasingly unsteady in his saddle. By the time they arrived at the small, weathered cabin, he was feverish, his wound angry and inflamed. Natty helped him inside and onto the single cot against the wall. She found supplies: water, bandages, a bottle of whiskey, and set about cleaning his wound. "This is going to hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over the gash in his arm. Jacob hissed through clenched teeth but didn't cry out. As Natty bandaged his arm, he watched her with fever-bright eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "For what?" "For my father. For what he did to your family." Natty shook her head. "You're not responsible for his actions. I should have stopped him years ago. I knew what kind of man he was becoming. You couldn't have known he'd go this far." She finished tying off the bandage. "Rest now. We'll talk more when your fever breaks." Jacob caught her hand as she moved away. "Stay." The vulnerability in his voice tightened something in her chest. She nodded, settling on the floor beside the cot, her back against the wall. Outside, night was falling, shadows lengthening across the bare wooden floor. "Why did you help me?" she asked after a while when she thought he might have fallen asleep. "Back in Truckee, you didn't know me." Jacob's eyes opened, finding hers in the dimness. "I saw something in you, something familiar." "What?" The look of someone who'd lost everything but wasn't broken by it. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I recognized it because I see it in the mirror every day." The honesty of his answer moved her. Without thinking, she reached out to brush a lock of hair from his forehead. His skin was hot with fever, but he leaned into her touch. "Try to sleep," she said softly. "I'll keep watch." Through the night, Jacob's fever worsened. Natty bathed his face with cool water from the well outside, changed his bandage, and watched with growing concern as he muttered incoherently in his delirium. By dawn, she had made a decision. "We need to get you to a doctor," she told him when he had a moment of lucidity. "Virginia City is too far. We have to go back to Truckee." "Too dangerous," he protested weakly. "Porter and his men are dead. The sheriff is away. It's our best chance." She began gathering their things. "Can you ride, if I must?" He struggled to sit up, swaying dangerously. "But you'll have to help me." Getting Jacob onto his horse was a challenge, but they managed. Natty mounted behind him, one arm wrapped around his waist to keep him upright as they set off toward Truckee. The journey back was arduous. Several times, Jacob nearly fell from the saddle, saved only by Natty's firm grip. By mid-afternoon, the familiar buildings of Truckee came into view. They rode directly to the doctor's house on the edge of town. Dr. Samuel Wilson, a grizzled veteran of the Mexican-American War, took one look at Jacob and ushered them inside. "Bullet wound," he observed as he helped Natty get Jacob onto the examination table. "And a nasty infection. How long ago was he shot?" "Yesterday morning," Natty replied, hovering anxiously as the doctor cut away the bandage. Dr. Wilson grunted. "Lucky you got him here when you did. Another day and gangrene might have set in." He looked up at Natty. "I need to clean the wound properly and stitch it. It won't be pleasant." "I'll stay," she said firmly. "As you wish. Hold him down then." The procedure was brutal but necessary. Jacob, though weakened, fought against the pain, requiring all of Natty's strength to keep him still as the doctor extracted bullet fragments, cleaned the wound, and stitched it closed. When it was over, Jacob lay unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. "He'll live," Dr. Wilson declared, washing blood from his hands. "But he needs rest. No travel for at least a week." "We can stay that long," Natty said, though she worried about the delay. With Porter dead, there was no immediate threat, but William Blackwood would eventually realize his men had failed. "You're welcome to use my spare room," the doctor offered. "Easier to monitor his condition that way." For the next 3 days, Natty rarely left Jacob's side. The fever broke on the second night, and by the third day he was lucid and restless. "We need to move on," he insisted as Natty helped him sit up in bed. "My father will send more men when Porter doesn't report back." "You're not strong enough yet," she countered. "Another day or two." Jacob sighed in frustration but didn't argue. Instead, he caught her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Thank you for coming back for me. Most would have taken the evidence and gone on alone." Natty felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "I couldn't leave you." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building since that first day in his office. Jacob tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer until she was perched on the edge of the bed. "Nathaniel Everett," he said softly. "Who are you, really?" Beyond the girl running for her life. The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her, the real her, not the disguise or the fugitive. I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "Before all this, I helped my father with the ranch. I enjoyed reading adventure stories mostly. I wanted to travel someday, see more than just California." She smiled sadly. "Simple dreams. Not simple, human." Jacob's hand moved to her cheek. "You'll have them again, different maybe, but yours." His touch sent warmth spreading through her. Without thinking, she leaned into it, her eyes closing briefly. "And you?" she asked. Who is Jacob Xander, beyond the saloon owner hiding from his past? A rueful smile touched his lips. A work in progress. I've been running for so long, I'm not sure I know how to stop. Maybe we can learn together, Natty suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Jacob's eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't name. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips brushed hers in a tentative kiss. Natty responded, her hand coming up to curl around the nape of his neck, drawing him closer. When they parted, both were breathing heavily. Jacob rested his forehead against hers, his good arm wrapped around her waist. "When this is over," he murmured, "when my father is brought to justice and your name is cleared. What then?" It was a question Natty had been avoiding. The future had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, with Jacob looking at her as if she were the answer to a question he'd been asking all his life, she allowed herself to consider possibilities. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I'd like to find out with you." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching outside. Jacob tensed, reaching for the gun that wasn't there. "Stay here," Natty said, moving to the window to peer out. 3 riders were dismounting in front of the doctor's house. One she recognized immediately, the sheriff, returned early from Carson City. The other 2 wore the badges of U.S. Marshals. "It's the sheriff," she reported, her heart racing. "With Marshals." Jacob struggled to his feet, ignoring her protests. "They've come about Porter, we need to face this now." Before she could stop him, he was pulling on his shirt, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Natty helped him, knowing he was right. Running would only make them look guilty. They met the lawman at the door, the portfolio of evidence in Natty's hands. "Sheriff," Jacob greeted, his voice stronger than his pale complexion suggested. "You're back early." The sheriff's expression was grim. "Jacob Xander, Nathaniel Everett, you're wanted for questioning regarding the deaths of 3 men found in the mountains." "We can explain," Natty said quickly, stepping forward. "We have evidence that can wait for a proper hearing," one of the marshals interrupted. "You'll both come with us to Carson City." Jacob straightened to his full height. "I'm afraid I must insist you hear us out first, gentlemen. The men you found were hired killers working for William Blackwood, a man who has committed multiple murders, including the parents of this young woman." He gestured to Natty, who offered the portfolio to the sheriff. "Everything is documented here, including orders for my parents' murder." The sheriff hesitated, then accepted the portfolio. He leafed through it, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he handed it to the marshals. "This changes things," the older marshal admitted after examining the documents, "but it doesn't explain the dead men in the pass." "Self-defense," Jacob stated firmly. "They tracked us from town and opened fire. I was wounded." He indicated his bandaged arm. "We had no choice." The lawmen exchanged looks. "We'll need formal statements," the sheriff said finally. "And you'll still need to come to Carson City to testify before a judge, but given the evidence—" He nodded toward the portfolio. "I don't see any need for cells at the moment." Relief flooded through Natty. She sagged against Jacob, who wrapped his good arm around her shoulders. "How soon can we leave?" Jacob asked. "Tomorrow morning," the younger marshal replied. "We'll escort you personally. Blackwood has influence, but these documents should be enough to bring charges against him." After the lawman departed with instructions to be ready at dawn, Natty and Jacob returned to the doctor's spare room. The gravity of what lay ahead settled over them. Confronting William Blackwood meant facing not just a murderer, but Jacob's own father. "Are you sure about this?" Natty asked softly. "Testifying against your father," Jacob's expression hardened. "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time. He needs to answer for what he's done to your family and others." She took his hand, drawing strength from his resolve. "Then we'll face him together." The journey to Carson City took 2 days, with Jacob regaining strength with each passing mile. They traveled under the protection of the marshals, the portfolio of evidence secure in the sheriff's saddlebags. Natty had expected to feel fear as they drew closer to the territorial capital, but instead found herself filled with a strange sense of purpose. Carson City was larger than Truckee, bustling with the business of government and mining. The marshals escorted them directly to the courthouse, where a judge had agreed to hear their evidence immediately. As they entered the imposing stone building, Natty noticed a well-dressed man in his 60s being escorted into a side room by several officials. Though she had never seen him before, something about his bearing the same height as Jacob, the same storm-gray eyes told her this was William Blackwood. Jacob saw him too. His stride faltered momentarily, his face paling beneath his tan. Then he squared his shoulders and continued forward, his hand finding Natty's and squeezing it gently. The hearing was conducted in the judge's chambers rather than the open court, a precaution, the marshals explained, given Blackwood's influence in the territory. Judge Harmon, a stern-faced man with piercing blue eyes, listened impassively as Jacob and Natty gave their testimonies. Natty recounted finding her parents murdered, being framed for the crime, and her months on the run. Jacob explained his connection to Blackwood and how he had come to help Natty, culminating in the deadly confrontation with Porter and his men in the mountain pass. When they finished, the judge examined the documents from the portfolio, his expression growing increasingly grave. "These are serious allegations," he said finally, "but the evidence appears substantial. I'll issue warrants for William Blackwood's arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, and obstruction of justice." Relief washed over Natty. After months of living in fear, justice was finally within reach. "There is the matter of the deaths at the mountain pass," the judge continued, fixing them with a stern gaze. "Under normal circumstances, this would warrant further investigation. However, given the circumstances and the testimony of Dr. Wilson regarding Mr. Xander's wound, I'm inclined to accept your claim of self-defense." "Thank you, Your Honor," Jacob said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Judge Harmon cautioned. "Blackwood won't go down easily. You'll both need to remain in Carson City until the trial, which could take months to prepare." "We understand," Natty replied. As they left the judge's chambers, one of the marshals approached them. "We've arranged rooms for you at the Silver Dollar Hotel. You'll be under our protection until the trial." The Silver Dollar was a step above the establishments Natty had been accustomed to during her months on the run. The rooms were clean and comfortable, with actual beds instead of cots or bedrolls on the ground. That evening, after settling into their adjacent rooms, Jacob knocked on Natty's door. When she opened it, he stood there looking more uncertain than she had ever seen him. "Would you join me for dinner?" he asked. "There's a decent restaurant downstairs." Natty glanced down at her travel-worn clothes. "I'm not exactly dressed for dining," Jacob smiled. "I took the liberty of asking the hotel manager's wife to find you something suitable. It should be delivered shortly." True to his word, a package arrived minutes later containing a simple but elegant blue dress. Natty changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar buttons and ties. It had been so long since she'd worn proper women's clothing that the sensation was almost foreign. When she met Jacob in the hotel lobby, his appreciative gaze made her cheeks warm. He offered his arm, and they walked into the restaurant together. Over dinner, they spoke not of Blackwood or the upcoming trial, but of simpler things, memories of happier times, hopes for what might come after. It was the first time since her parents' deaths that Natty allowed herself to think seriously about the future. "What will you do when this is over?" Jacob asked as they lingered over coffee. "Return to your family's ranch," Natty considered the question. "I'm not sure there's anything to go back to. Porter said they sold the land after." She couldn't finish the sentence. "We could find out," Jacob suggested. "If it's still there, if you wanted it back, I could help." The offer touched her deeply. "And you, what will you do?" Jacob twirled his coffee cup thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that. The saloon in Truckee was just a stopping point. I never intended to stay as long as I did." He met her gaze directly. "I'd like to start fresh, somewhere new." "Where? That depends," he said softly. "On whether I'd be going alone." The implication hung between them, fragile and full of possibility. Natty reached across the table to take his hand. "I think," she said carefully, "that starting fresh sounds wonderful, and that doing it alone would be a terrible waste." The smile that spread across Jacob's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then we'll make plans," he promised. After the trial, the weeks that followed settled into a strange routine. By day, they worked with the prosecutors, going over their testimonies, reviewing evidence. By night, they explored Carson City together, gradually allowing themselves to believe in a future beyond Blackwood's shadow. Jacob's wound healed completely, leaving only a puckered scar as a reminder of their confrontation with Porter. Natty abandoned her disguise as Nathan completely, though she kept her hair short, finding she preferred the convenience of it. 3 weeks after their arrival in Carson City, as they were returning from an evening walk, a marshal was waiting for them at the hotel. "There's been a development," he said grimly. "Blackwood escaped custody this morning. He had helped bribed guards. We think he's headed east, maybe to Salt Lake City or beyond." The news hit like a physical blow. All their careful preparation, their hopes for justice gone in an instant. "What happens now?" Natty asked, her voice hollow. "We'll keep searching, of course, but I wanted to warn you. As long as he's free, you're both in danger." After the marshal left, Jacob paced their sitting room, frustration evident in every line of his body. "All this was for nothing," he said bitterly. "He's going to get away with it all." "Not for nothing," Natty countered. "The evidence is still there, the truth is known. But no justice." Jacob stopped pacing, his expression hardening into resolve. "Unless we find him ourselves." Natty stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I know my father better than any marshal. I know how he thinks, where he might go." Jacob knelt before her chair, taking her hands. "We could track him, bring him back to face what he's done." "It's too dangerous," she protested. "The marshals said the marshals will follow procedure. My father will be long gone before they get close." Jacob's eyes were intense with determination. "This is my responsibility, Natty. He's my father. His crimes are my burden." "No," she said firmly, cupping his face in her hands. "They're not. You didn't choose your blood, Jacob. You chose your path, and it led you away from him, not toward him." He leaned into her touch, his anger softening. "Then what do we do?" Natty considered the question carefully. The prospect of William Blackwood roaming free, potentially plotting revenge against them, was terrifying. But the idea of Jacob confronting his father, of risking everything they had begun to build together, was worse. "We live," she said simply. "We start that new life we talked about, somewhere he won't find us." Jacob searched her face. "You would do that? Leave behind any chance of clearing your name completely?" "My name is already cleared in the ways that matter. The judge believed us. The marshals believe us." She smiled softly. "And I have you. What more do I need?" The tension in Jacob's shoulders eased. He rose to sit beside her, gathering her in his arms. "I don't deserve you, Nathaniel Everett," she laughed against his chest. "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." They left Carson City the next morning, heading west but avoiding Truckee. The marshals provided them with new identification papers. Jacob remained Jacob Xander, but Natty became Nora Evans officially, the identity they had created now legitimate. They traveled slowly, taking time to explore the countryside, discussing possibilities for where they might settle. Neither mentioned William Blackwood, though Natty often caught Jacob scanning their surroundings, ever vigilant for signs of pursuit. 2 weeks into their journey, they arrived in a small but growing settlement called Pine Ridge, nestled in a green valley with mountains rising beyond. The town had a promising look, new buildings going up, but not so new that it lacked established businesses. "What do you think?" Jacob asked as they rode down the main street. Natty took in the tidy storefronts, the bustling livery, the schoolhouse under construction at the far end of town. "It feels right." They took rooms at the local boarding house and spent the next few days exploring the town and surrounding area. The valley was fertile, with several successful farms already established. The town itself served as a supply point for miners working claims in the nearby hills, but lacked the rough and tumble atmosphere of many mining towns. On their third day, they discovered a property for sale, a modestly sized ranch just outside town, with a small but solid house and good water access. The previous owner had died without heirs, and the bank was eager to sell. "It's not much," Jacob said as they walked the property. "But it's a start." Natty stood on the porch, looking out over the rolling pasture to the mountains beyond. She could see cattle grazing there, perhaps horses too, a garden by the house, maybe chickens. "A future. It's perfect," she said. They purchased the ranch the next day, using the money Jacob had managed to transfer from his accounts in Truckee. Within a week, they had moved in and begun making the place their own. Word spread quickly through the small community about the new couple who had bought the old Wilson place. Neighbors dropped by with welcome gifts and offers of help, a gesture that initially made both Jacob and Natty wary, accustomed as they were to keeping to themselves. Gradually, they allowed themselves to become part of the community. Jacob's experience running the saloon in Truckee made him a natural for the town council when an opening arose. Natty found herself teaching reading at the new schoolhouse several days a week, discovering a talent and passion she hadn't known she possessed. They were married in the spring, a simple ceremony in the town's small church with their new neighbors as witnesses. Natty wore a gown of ivory silk that Jacob had ordered from San Francisco, and he wore a new suit without a trace of the cowboy he had once been. As they spoke their vows, Natty looked into Jacob's eyes and saw the future they had fought so hard for, a future free from fear, built on trust and the love that had grown between them from that first day in Truckee. Life settled into a rhythm of hard work and quiet contentment. They expanded the ranch, added more cattle, built a larger barn. Jacob's business sense helped them prosper, while Natty's practicality kept them grounded. They remained vigilant, always aware that William Blackwood might one day find them. But as months turned into a year, and then too, the fear receded, becoming a shadow rather than a constant presence. In their third year in Pine Ridge, Natty gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after the piano player who had helped them escape Truckee. The boy had his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As he grew, he was joined by a sister, Margaret, named for Natty's mother. On the evening of their 5th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, a rider appeared on the road leading to their ranch. Jacob tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the gun he still kept within reach. The rider approached slowly, an older man with a marshal's badge visible on his coat. Jacob stood as the man dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Mr. Xander," the marshal called. "Mrs. Xander, I'm Marshal Dawson from Carson City." Natty joined Jacob, her heart racing. "Is it about William Blackwood?" The marshal removed his hat. "Yes, madam. I thought you should know he was found dead last month in Denver, apparently had been living under an assumed name for some time." Jacob's hand found Natty's, squeezing tightly. "You're certain it was him?" "No doubt." "Had your military tags on him, Mr. Xander. Thought you might want them back." The marshal reached into his pocket and withdrew the small leather sack that had started their journey together. Jacob accepted it with a steady hand. "Thank you for bringing word, Marshal." "There's more," Dawson continued. "Before he died, Blackwood signed a full confession, cleared your name officially, Mrs. Xander, and yours, sir, of any involvement in the deaths of Porter and his men. Self-defense, just as you claimed." The news washed over them like a cleansing rain. William Blackwood was gone. The threat that had hung over them for so long had finally passed. After the marshal departed, promising to send the official documentation, Jacob and Natty remained on the porch, watching as the sun set behind the mountains. "It's over," Natty said softly. "Truly over." Jacob opened the leather sack, letting the military tag slide into his palm. "Yes, it is." He stood, walking to the edge of the porch. With a decisive movement, he drew back his arm and threw the tags as far as he could into the gathering darkness. "No more ghosts," he said as he returned to Natty's side. "Only the future now." She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "And what a future it is." From inside the house came the sound of their children's laughter, bright and clear in the evening air. Behind them, the home they had built together stood solid and welcoming. Before them stretched the land they had nurtured from neglect to prosperity. Jacob turned to Natty, his eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "Do you ever regret it, running into Truckee that day, all that came after?" She thought of the fear, the danger, the hardships they had endured. Then she looked at the life they had created, the love, the family, the peace. "Not for a moment," she answered truthfully. "Every step led us here. How could I regret that?" He kissed her then, tender and sure, a promise renewed with each passing day. And as darkness settled over Pine Ridge, they went inside to their children, to their home, to the life they had fought for and won together. Years later, long after their children had children of their own, visitors to Pine Ridge would sometimes hear the story of Jacob and Nora Xander, how they had arrived with nothing but determination, how they had built one of the most prosperous ranches in the region, how their love for each other had never dimmed through decades together. Few knew the full truth of their beginning, of a desperate young woman disguised as a boy, of a saloon owner hiding from his own name, of a whispered plea and a leather sack that changed everything. That story remained theirs alone, a private legend of courage and redemption in the wild frontier that had forged their love. And in the quiet evenings of their long life together, they would sometimes sit on that same porch, hands clasped as they had been since that first desperate journey, and marvel at how far they had come from that autumn day in Truckee when fate had brought them together.